Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I have one request before I get started, and that is no video recording of those screens, because if you do, I will go to prison. I did not get the rights to about 90% of the images you're about to see, and I really don't want to go to jail. So you can shoot my beautiful face and all that, and this podium, amazing podium, but not the screens, okay? All right. So I didn't know I was going to get a little bit of a bio going. So before I got up here, so I figured I'd start with talking about who I am. It's not because I'm so unique, but because I'm not. I lived through pretty much the entire history of video games, and even predate them a little bit. But I figured you should know why you're listening to a guy with all this gray hair before I actually dive in. So this is me as a kid. And it was a different world. It was a world where being a geek and a nerd, not that I am, yeah, I am one. But this was the stuff that identified you as kind of weird, right? Ray Harryhausen films and Fantastic Four comic books. And has anybody read the Tom Corbett books? There's no way any of you have read it. But I could recite that entire series for you right now if you wanted. No, we're not doing that. I knew somebody was going to be a wise guy and say that. But this was the stuff that was going to put you in the territory of this kid's going to be in therapy for the rest of his life. What was destroying the world was this stuff. So it was a different time. It was also a different time for games. There were no games. I played chess with my dad and Monopoly with my family once in a while, but I didn't think about them much. They were just a way to pass some time. And this is what computers looked like. I remember when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was taking the bus home from school, and I got off and went into a Honeywell showroom. These are Honeywell computers. And a guy, I'm not kidding, a guy in a white lab coat came over and looked down at me and said, "What do you want, kid?" And I said, "Do you have a brochure?" And he kicked me out. But games and computers started changing, and in 1978, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons and other kind of tweaky board games, and I was doomed. We'll come back to that. And this is me when I was in grad school, and I was probably the same age you folks are. And the fact that I had a 16 millimeter projector, I got a lot of dates out of that, by the way. But if you look closely, you can see, hey man, having a movie projector before VCRs. Anyway, funny looking dice, D&D dice. I was pretty much obsessed. I played in the same D&D group for 10 years and loved every second of it. But it was a pastime for weird kids, and I was in graduate school. So what was it that it fascinated me so much, and why did I get obsessed with it, which I really did? It was because there was this feeling of unbridled creativity, telling stories, not being told a story by someone, but telling stories with your friends. And that realization that I could be creative and I could participate in the telling of a story set me on the course I'm still on today. As pathetic as it sounds, I have spent the last 30, however many years, a bunch of years trying to recreate that feeling I had when I played D&D for the first time. So that's, if you want to know everything about me, that's all you need to know. But something else was going on around this same time. The most high-tech thing in the world. But then something else high-tech showed up. I bought one of these, an Atari VCS. And all of a sudden, video games were no longer just in arcades. They were in my home. It was amazing. And then before you know it, I had an Atari 400, which I hot rodded within an inch of its life, man. I put a real keyboard on it. I added 32K of RAM, getting it all the way up to 48K, which, by the way, was 16K more than those enormous Honeywells had. I showed you in a picture before. So computers were no longer no longer owned by the guys in white lab coats. I had one too. And here's the game on the electronic side that just destroyed me. Anybody remember this game? I went over to a friend's house. He was having a party. And I opened the door, and all the lights were out, and there were 20 adult people sitting there lit only by the glow of the phosphor dots on his TV. And it was the biggest TV any of us had ever seen. It was 25 inches. And I watched it. Well, this is what I saw. Anyway, that was the very first real-time 3D first-person perspective game. And that was also pretty chilling for me. That was the first time I ever felt like I was Luke Skywalker. You know, it wasn't me watching Mark Hamill. It was me doing that. But next thing I knew, I had dropped out of a PhD program, and my mom cried for 10 years. All of a sudden, I was working a minimum wage job at Steve Jackson Games. You know, it was a pretty crazy time. I can tell you all sorts of stories about that. But that's my wife, by the way. Yes, it was an office romance. From there, I went to TSR, the company that made D&D. But two things stand out about those years. The first one was that company called SSI, which all of you are too young to remember. Some of you remember. They were doing licensed AD&D games. And I got to do some testing on them. You know, what was it? Hills Far and Curse of the Azure Bonds and Pool of Radiance. And with apologies to all of the friends I made at SSI, I looked at those when I was testing them and thought, man, these don't capture anything that I like about D&D. But I was also playing Ultima games at that point. And those were starting to get at what really appealed to me about D&D. So I forgot the second thing. The second thing that happened is there was a day, this is also a true story. It sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not. I was sitting in my office with 20-sided dice in one hand and percentile dice in the other, and thinking, which one am I going to use in this new game system? And at that moment, I realized if that was the biggest decision I had to make in my professional life, I had to find a new career. And so, loved the Ultima games, needed to find a way to do something different, and so I ended up at Origin. I started out there thinking, I'm going to teach these computer guys what interactivity is all about. It took me about a week to realize I knew nothing. I got schooled by Richard Garriott and got to work on games like this. Anyway, I can tell you a bunch of stories. Collar me later. I'll tell you all sorts of fun stories. But I got to work on a bunch of games at Origin that I'm really proud of. But after 7 years, it was time to move on. So I went to Looking Glass, where unfortunately we shipped nothing. I shipped more games with Looking Glass before I started working there than I did after. It was very strange. So anyway, I left there to go work at Ion Storm, where I was able to build a great team, and we made Deus Ex. Just to show you how things have changed, or at least start, if in the upper right, if you can see anything from the back, that is the entire Deus Ex team. And in the picture on the bottom, that was the day Deus Ex shipped, 15 years ago, June 15 years ago. And that was one of the designers and the entire programming team. I have no idea how we made that game. But we won some awards, which was cool. We had a great time. We had some not so great times, crunching very hard. But after 7 years there, I decided it was time to go out and do a startup, which became Junction Point. And what I wanted to do, and I promise this is all going to come back around to what I actually said I was going to talk about. I set up Junction Point to do two things. One was I wanted to collaborate with people in Hollywood, with filmmakers and television folks, to create content that would work in both media. Not that they would license our stuff and make bad movies, or we would license their stuff and make bad games. But we would work together so we could make good movies and good games at the same time. So that was the first thing I wanted to do at Junction Point. And the second thing is I wanted to just not deal with the standard distribution channels at all. I wanted to go out and digitally distribute episodic content like TV stuff. Damn you, Telltale. They beat me to it. But what happened, actually, look, that's just my dog being eaten by a T-Rex. I think that's a funny picture. But eventually we started doing work at Junction Point on some concept stuff for what became Disney Epic Mickey. And in 2013, in an amazing wave of layoffs, Disney shut down my studio, and I was figuring out what to do, and I'll come back to that in a while too. So that's my story. What does any of that have to do with video games and other media? Well, I wanted to give you a sense of my credentials, but also I wanted you to understand how recent the invention of video games really is. It may seem like it's been around forever, and some of you don't remember a time when there weren't video games, but it's really only about 40 years ago that this all got started. And what that means is we're this crazy infant medium, and we're still trying to figure out what we're all about. If you think we're done and games are a solved problem, you're just not thinking hard enough. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for us. Okay, so when I started thinking about today's talk, I thought there might be lessons that games with a capital G, capital G games, could learn from other media, or that we shouldn't learn from other media. But as I thought about it, what I had put together for my talk was really this. What Warren Spector can't, should, and shouldn't learn from other media. And, I have a tendency to generalize a little bit. But there didn't seem to be much value in a talk like that, okay, unless you're curious about the games that I make specifically. So I decided to take a different approach, one that acknowledged that there's an incredible variety of games out there, and it's not just the kind that I make. So today I want to try to talk about all sorts of games and what they can and can't and should and shouldn't learn from other media. I will tell you I'm going to constrain that discussion to narrative games. Because frankly, I don't think there's a whole lot that Match 3 games have to learn from Steven Spielberg. But also, I need to keep this under 3 hours. So my goal is not to, make pronouncements about all games here. However, I'll warn you right now that I'm going to slip because I am a pontificator. And I will, here's the problem, okay? I have a mission. And if you get me started, I'll talk about mission for the next 3 hours too. But I believe in celebrating what makes games unique. And that means inevitably moving away from what makes us like other media. So it can be hard for me to celebrate other kinds of games, but I'm really going to try hard, okay? And I'm going to try to give you a signal when I'm generalizing, so you know. Okay. All right, one more thing. When I started putting this talk together, I thought about it strictly in terms of the formal characteristics of games, how games work. And what I realized was that wasn't enough. That was too narrow. So I broadened the view to 3 different areas where I think games are impacted and can impact media. One is first, games as a business, then games as cultural artifacts, because I think we're becoming more and more important all the time. And then third, as formal constructs. So we'll talk a little bit about rules and conventions. How many of you are developers? How many of you want to be developers? Oh, good, because if you were just fans, this would be really boring. Okay. Now, obviously, in an hour-long talk, leaving room for Q&A, I hope. I can't go too deeply into any of this stuff. You can teach a whole course about any of those things, business, culture, or dare I say it, art. But I'm just going to try to introduce some ideas and give you a little bit of a taste of what you can explore further when you leave here. Okay, so let's talk about business and production and development. From a business standpoint, at the very least, mainstream game publishers have learned a lot from the film industry and from television. If you listen to publishing executives, you hear them talking about tent poles. See the look of disdain on my face here? This is my disdainful face. And franchises. How many of you have played Call of Duty 72? Yeah, all right, sorry. Ooh, I'm never working again. And they talk about pre-sold properties, just like film executives, okay? And they're willing to spend $30, $40, $100 million to market those tentpole franchise pre-sold properties to ensure that everybody starts salivating over them. So it's clear we've learned some business lessons. Another lesson we've learned is about budgets. One of the first games I worked on, Martian Dreams, which I am inordinately proud of, by the way, even though no one remembers it. I was budgeted at $225,000, start to finish, and I got reamed by my boss because I spent $273,000. At Junction Point, we were spending that every week, so let's just move on. Okay, And you remember all those games I was working on at Origin? I was kind of the B-movie guy. I was the guy making the low-budget stuff, which was great because nobody cared and nobody paid attention, so I could try all sorts of wacky stuff. I flew under the radar. But from a business standpoint, games like this don't exist anymore. They just don't. The game industry right now, at least on the mainstream side, is go big or go home. Hits are all that matter. And I find that very sad. That's a lesson I wish we hadn't learned. But one good thing that we've learned is that an indie scene is really vital to our development. It's really vital to us in every way. And that's really low budget fare, right? There's big budget stuff and then there's no budget stuff. But there's nothing in between, which is really annoying. But at least we now recognize that this is important. We've learned that from the movies too. You know, you can go make a game on your credit card the way Robert Rodriguez did when he was starting out. What that's meant is that creative opportunities have broadened. I could talk all day about this too. Damnation, I wish I had more time. But what it means is that games as personal statements are a part of our lives now. And again, I think we've learned that from the mainstream media. From the music business, we've learned all sorts of stuff about alternate distribution systems. When I started out, if you couldn't get into software, et cetera, with your box and your discs, you just couldn't reach an audience. But now, with all of these places, with all of these distribution possibilities, in much the same way that bands can buy instruments, make recordings, and reach an audience, you can go out and find the tools you need to execute against any idea you have and reach an audience with it. Even the console guys are figuring out that this is pretty cool. And have we learned anything from television? Yeah, damn you, Telltale. I really wanted to do that. But in terms of content style and distribution, we no longer have to imitate movies and make big standalone epics. We can actually create episodic content and tell all sorts of new stories. From a development standpoint, same thing. We model our production processes, our development processes after movies and television. We use the same words. Our credits follow the same model as film and TV. Why reinvent the wheel? So in a variety of ways, we have learned on the business and development side from other media. And it's mostly good. I mean, I wish we did a little bit less thinking about tent poles and epics and stuff. But we've learned a lot. In terms of culture, let's talk about how games are plugging into culture nowadays. The fact is that no medium exists in a vacuum. Not movies, not television, not comic books, not radio, not us. Media, they both affect and are affected by the cultural zeitgeist, okay? And one of the ways in which we're affecting it is, holy cow, we make a lot of money. According to Gartner is an analyst company. They evaluate businesses and talk about where they're going to go. We were a $93 billion business last year. Holy cow. They're projecting that we'll be a $111 billion business this year. That really does mean more people spend money and time playing games than watching movies and television and listening to music. That's pretty incredible. So we are definitely touching more people than ever before. We have millions of people. I mean, when D&D was just for nerds, it was a whole different world. There are millions of people playing games now. Console gamers, which I assume all of you are a big part of that. But we also have to accept that my mom plays solitaire on her computer. And I defy any of you to deny that you have a smartphone in your pocket right now. And I mean, how many people staying at this hotel who are not in this room have played something like Candy Crush today? Okay, so basically, whether people self-define as gamers or not, pretty much everyone is a gamer now. So we've had that kind of impact. And our audience isn't just bigger. I actually wish I could have found the pictures of my 70-year-old mother-in-law playing Guitar Hero. That would have been fun. If you see that upper left, that's John McCain sitting in a committee hearing playing online poker. You know? Thank God the guy didn't get elected president, you know? I mean, he needs to be paying attention, whatever your politics are. But more women play games now than men, and the average age of gamers topped 30 years ago. Okay. Finally, we have critics. Oh my gosh, do we have critics? We're being lumped in with TV and movies, so you know we've really made it. No, actually, you know the way we've really made it is that there are threats of censorship and denial of our First Amendment rights and all that stuff. Thank God the Supreme Court actually said we have First Amendment rights. But when Congress goes after you, you kind of know you've made it, you know? So that's a good thing. So for what it's worth, though, every medium that lasts goes through exactly what we're going through right now, okay? So let me talk to you a little bit about media history. Anybody know who that is? Okay. In his day, Shakespeare was called a lowlife whose Globe Theater attracted the dregs of humanity. You know, there was a critic or a writer back then who said, "Who is this Shakespeare who thinks he can bombast out a blank verse?" He was reviled, you know. Novels. When novels first showed up, they were reviled. People shouldn't be indoors reading about life. They should be out living it. When movies started, they were blamed for every social ill you can imagine. Even when they were well into their adolescence, there were threats of censorship. No one took them seriously as an art form. They were just a bastard medium of theater, which we'll come back to. Comic books, anybody know Frederick Waltham? Seduction of the Innocent? Congressional hearings? Yeah, comic books, congressional hearings. Why didn't that work? There we go. These were the things that were destroying the world, okay? The Three Stooges and Bugs Bunny were going to make me a juvenile delinquent. My mom was convinced of that. So the crucial point is that we are plugging into this cultural history in a way that every medium does. Whatever medium the adults of a given generation don't get is dangerous. And whatever medium they grew up with is okay. Kids grow up with scary and dangerous thing, and it's a lesson we never seem to learn. But here's the thing. Here's why I'm encouraged about the future of games. Every outsider activity, rock and roll, cartoons, movies, everything, eventually stopped being this outsider stuff that people don't understand and trust and becomes an insider activity, okay? So just be patient and all of our problems are going to go away. No, seriously, when everybody's a moviegoer or everybody's a television viewer, no one is going to think we're dangerous. We won't be criticized in that way. We will have positive cultural effects instead of negative ones. I'll tell you, okay, so I probably shouldn't do this because I don't have a lot of time, but funny story. I was up at Pixar. This is not a funny story. I can't believe I'm telling it. But I was up at Pixar. They asked me to give a talk about game narrative. And afterwards, in the Q&A period, someone asked me what I thought about Roger Ebert, who at the time had said that games can't be art and will never be art. And I said, because I have no self-censoring mechanism, I said, I don't care about Roger Ebert. Someday he's going to be dead, and we will have won. And the problem is, he had cancer, and I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. At that same talk, I also here's how smart I am. I also said that movies are the medium of the 20th century and games are the medium of the 21st at Pixar. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, it's already starting to turn around. Okay. When everybody's a gamer, no one's going to think games are dangerous. And it's difficult to find anybody, you know, under the age of 30 or 35 or 40 who's not a gamer. So just wait them out, and someday they'll be gone, and everyone will be a gamer, and it'll be all right. So just be ready for this. This is a fact. You may not believe it, but someday, when some of you are parents, some other medium is going to come along that you don't understand. And you're going to think it's dangerous and wonder why your kids don't play games, okay? Just get ready for it, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Okay, so we've borrowed all this stuff for on the business side, and there's way more. If I had more time, we could talk about a lot more. We are a cultural force, all right? We are impacted by and impact culture. But there is a big but in our future, okay? It's all nice, but if we're going to cement our future as a medium with lasting value, we have to start thinking about ourselves and what makes us unique. Okay. So again, I'm trying not to generalize as we move into rules and conventions and formal characteristics. And I'm going to be talking exclusively about narrative games pretty much. But we are part of a long evolutionary chain of storytelling media, all right? And each one actually built on the foundation of the ones that came before. And so here's a juicy quote. I do not expect you to read this. A, it's too long. B, it's too small. So I will paraphrase. This is Janet Murray. She said this in a book called First Person, which is terrific, and you should look at it. But what she's saying is that games incorporate pretty much every storytelling tool there is and ever has been. And I mostly buy that, okay? I mostly buy it. But when I read that, I started thinking, is that all we are? Are we just an amalgamation of other stuff jammed together? Obviously, I think we're more than that. Okay. But let me be clear. It's okay to borrow. All media borrow. In their early days when they're trying to figure out how they work, they're all influenced by earlier media, and it's fine. Movies started out basically imitating theater. Here's a classic example from 1912. This is Sarah Bernhardt, greatest actress of the late 19th century and early 20th century, in Queen Elizabeth, 1912. Notice that the camera has not moved. Notice that the camera will not move. Notice that the camera is positioned right in the middle of what would be the orchestra seats in a theater. Okay? I will not force you to sit through any more of that. It's not very cinematic. But the movies, they had no idea what they were doing. And so clearly they were borrowing from live theater. In radio's early days, most of you probably don't remember when radio was a narrative medium, but for many years it was. They borrowed content from movies all the time. And from live theater. They would recreate movies using sound and music and words, and that's it. So, and then early television, all they did was add pictures to radio shows or televised live performances as if they were filming a live theater show, but with cinematic editing techniques. So Jack Benny on TV was exactly the same guy he was on radio. They were borrowing. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples, but let them stand for all media borrowing all the time. And let's see if we can apply that to games at all. All right, so some of the similarities between movie, television, and games are so obvious, I'm embarrassed that even to say them, right? We look like movies and TV. We sound like movies and TV. Frankly, it's getting kind of scary that you can walk by someone who's playing a game, watch what they're playing, and not even know if it's a real, when I watch, the NBA 2K games, is that real? Or is that a basketball game, or is that a basketball game? It's amazing. But it's an indication of how much alike movies and TV and games really can be. I already talked about this. We've borrowed modes of production. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. But how are we different? Okay, there are a lot of similarities. The most important difference, I think, comes in when you start talking about editing. All right, the treatment of time and place in movies and television is different than much of what we do in games. I'm not going to generalize. I'll come back to this. So cinematic editing, hey, establishing shot, reaction shot, close up. That's kind of the thing that differentiates movies from live theater and from earlier media. That cinematic editing is what sets them apart. Developed over many years by guys like this, who I would go into if I had more time. But nothing has changed cinematically with the exception of maybe MTV destroying your attention span since 1907, okay? Movies are made basically the same way. Here's an example. This is from a movie called Way Down East, 1920, made by D.W. Griffith. Parallel action is when something is happening over here and something is happening over there, and the director is cutting between those two things. Building tension, creating what is the quintessential cinematic moment. Will he rescue the girl? Okay, that is the classic cinematic moment right there in a nutshell. Now, we use cutscenes to tell our stories, lots of us. We've all fallen victim to that. And there are plenty of games that are trying to be like movies. They're actively trying to be like movies. And they better have learned the classic cinematic editing techniques, or they're pretty much going to fail. And happily, I think the guys at Telltale and David Cage at Quantic Dream, I mean, they really have done a good job of mastering those techniques, and some miraculous way changing the camera position and not completely disorienting players. I mean, it's crazy. It's magic, and I don't know how they do it. But they're clearly learning lessons. So that's a lesson some games and developers should learn, but not for me. Holy cow. In a first-person shooter or a real-time strategy game or even a puzzle game, learning that lesson from movies and TV is a disaster, okay? I mean, those games are all about creating that feeling of immersion, that you're there, that it's you in the world. And editing completely breaks that, right? It's not continuous action. It's breaking that. And just wait for VR, man. When Oculus shows up, unless Hollywood adopts VR and basically destroys 120 years of filmmaking techniques, VR is really not going to be happy with cuts. Okay, so I just want to, this is kind of self-indulgent, but I want to show you a couple of films that predated and basically kind of predicted what games were going to be like. It's pretty crazy. These clips are instructive because they failed miserably. Okay, they failed critically, they failed commercially, they failed aesthetically, they failed in every way it's possible to fail. And so let me just show you the first one. This is a game. It might as well be a game. This is a movie called Rope, which Alfred Hitchcock made without any cuts. It's supposed to look like one continuous take. They're actually cuts, but they're masked pretty well. It doesn't communicate suspense or tension or anything. Okay, imagine watching that for 3 hours, okay?
We haven't had much opportunity to observe the resemblance lately, my
He
boy.
ignored the
Haven't been
fundamental
studying, have you?
rules of
I've been
his
trying
media.
to, sir.
I mean, it's
Oh, dear.
crazy. Now, just to be fair, there have been, as far as I know, 2 other movies in the history of movies that have tried to do this. There may be others if you know them. What's that? That's Birdman. That's right there. That's one of the 2. The other one actually is opening this week. The other one, Victoria, is opening this week. And all the reviews are saying it's such a bad idea to make a movie that's one take. You know, basically, yes, Birdman, I love Birdman as a note. It was more successful. It is not going to change anything. It's basically, these movies do not exploit the defining characteristic of film. By contrast, continuous action is what all of my games are about. It's what all real-time strategy games are about. It's what all of those games are about. I want the player to see every step the hero takes because they're the ones taking the steps, okay? So with that in mind, let's take a look at another dismal failure of a movie. This is from 1947. Robert Montgomery was a very well-known actor, and this is his first film as a director. He made 6 films total. I'm amazed they let him make a second. Again, failed horribly in every way. This is called Lady in the Lake. Okay, you get the gag, right? Yeah, okay. I don't even think I need to say anything about that. Imagine watching that for a couple hours. Actually, they're both Rope and Lady in the Lake are worth watching if you're under the influence of something. But anyway, I'm never going to work again. Oh my God. Again, in most games, I would argue, the ones that aren't specifically trying to imitate another medium, players don't fill in the gaps. I mean, you don't create gaps. Players fill them in, okay? These games work because there are no cuts. Very different from movies. Okay, so are there other differences? Obviously, yes, or I wouldn't have put the slide up. I want to talk about 2 of them. These come up every time I talk to folks in Hollywood. When I started Junction Point, I really did get the chance to work with a bunch of folks out in LA who I can't name. But they all treat pacing and characterization the same way, and wonderful ways in their media. Okay, so let's talk about pacing. Specifically, not just the pacing that comes from editing, but the way filmmakers think about the pacing of a story is completely different than in games. The way they look at Act 1 is that they introduce you to the characters and they introduce you to the world and then they go on. And anyway, they have the luxury of time, okay? In a game, you have seconds. You have seconds to get players into the action, right? This filmmaker, one filmmaker, is really, really well-known guy, didn't get this at all, that we only have seconds. He really wanted to make games that were leisurely at the beginning, which wouldn't work. So the problem was, I realized that this guy has a really big reputation. He works in a medium where his audience understands how stories are told, and they trust him. So they're a captive audience. They can't leave. It's like you guys. If any of you leave, you're going to be really embarrassed because I'm going to call you out, you know? But games don't have that luxury. If in 30 seconds people aren't having fun, they're going to put that game down and never pick it up again. But it gets worse. You know, classic stories, there's setup in Act 1, complication in Act 2, and, you know, resolution in Act 3, right? That's the classic, you know, story structure. In a movie, that takes about 2 hours. In a game, even a short one, it's 5 to 10 hours, right? That means Act 2, the problem is that our middle act has to be, 4, 5, 8 hours long. And what that means is we have to create a bunch of content. And let's be honest, most of it is filler, okay? I wish we would start making 2-hour games. It's one of the reasons why I really hate Telltale that they got there first. But it's just amazing to me that players put up with all that filler in Act 2. But think about it. In Act 2, movies speed up. All the action starts happening, and games slow down. So there's a lesson not to learn there, okay? Unless you're Hideo Kojima. Okay. I don't know how he does it. I'm just going to go on before I really end up alienating everybody I know. Okay. So the other way that movie guys think about their craft differently than we probably should is the way they approach characters and characterization. Very different. Everybody I met out there thinks in terms of this. The wonderful moment, right? One-shot behaviors. Character does something once, and it's amazing. Set pieces, right? None of that works in any game. I would argue none of this works in any game. I actually can say I was working with John Woo, which was incredibly cool. I geeked out big time. I made him autograph a bunch of stuff. Anyway. But there was a moment when we were working together. We were creating a game called, a game and movie called Ninja Gold, about Kat Sato, modern-day ninja. And there was a point where I'm sitting there. This guy he was in his 60s, and he leaps out of his chair, and he was like a dancer. He started acting out this thing that Kat Sato would do. And it was amazing. I mean, it would have captured the character perfectly. It better than any game has ever defined a character ever. Just this one thing. It was magical, okay? But then I had to bring him down to earth and explain that just doesn't work in games. As cool as it was, cinematic one-shots get really boring when you see them for the 15th, 20th, or 1,000th time, okay? Anybody remember this game? Okay. John Woo inspired. The first time doves fly up at the sound of guns, it's really cool. The 100th time, just kind of silly. Okay. The first time Chow Yun-fat leaps onto a dim sum cart and goes flying across a room, firing with 2 guns. When I saw that for the first time, I was screaming. Oh my God, I'd never seen anything like this in my life. Same thing. Cool becomes really uncool with repetition. So here's the thing. Games work differently. At their best, we offer characterization driven by player choice, which I'm going to come back to probably 100 times. But we're about repeated action, okay? We're about repeated actions that become significant and varied because of when and how they're happening, okay? The context is what makes things cool, not the magic moment. Even more, whether you're playing BioShock or a Tomb Raider game or Papers, Please or Walking Dead, if players are walking around saying, wasn't it cool when Lara Croft did this? Instead of, wasn't it cool when I did this? I think you've just completely screwed up, okay? If the puppet on the screen is the important thing to you, just go make a movie, okay? Get out of my medium. and go make a movie, all right? We want players to be the heroes, not the characters on the screen. Okay, and finally, it used to be that games modeled themselves after movies, and now we do it. We model ourselves after TV. So anyway, that's just, I hate Telltale. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about tabletop games. How many of you have played Dungeons and Dragons? The rest of you are lying. Okay. No, you're in a very select group if you did not play Dungeons and Dragons and you're in this room. Okay. So how many of you can recite the D&D mantra? Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, right? Given the tabletop roots of most game pioneers, it's no surprise that we have learned a lot from tabletop role-playing. Okay, the most important thing, and I think the best thing, is we've learned the power of collaborative storytelling. It's like I said, when I first discovered D&D, telling stories with my friends was the most amazing thing I'd ever done, okay? And that, I believe, is the fundamental nature of video games as well. If we're doing it right, we're collaborating to tell stories with our players, all right? We're at our best when we're doing that. And borrowing that idea from tabletop role-playing games is probably the most important thing we can do. But there are some ways that we're different, or should be. Content. I never want to see another game where you're the last space marine between Earth and alien invasion. Okay? I never want to see, never is a big word. I would rather not see a whole lot more games where a guy in plate armor is swinging a broadsword or there's some woman in chainmail bikini, okay? We just don't need that anymore. We need to break away from adolescent male power fantasies, which is where classic tabletop games pretty much live. And we have to, D&D was invented by a bunch of war gamers locked in a library basement in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We cannot let that drive our future, okay? Another way in which we should not be learning from tabletop games is in their simulation techniques. We have so many better ways to simulate what's going on in a world than secret die rolls, We have physics. We have object property systems. We have all sorts of ways of letting players interact with the world that do not involve secret die rolls behind a dungeon master's screen, okay? If you're still thinking in terms of D20s, you're probably thinking game development 1990. Okay, and one way in which we're different should shame us. I have been saying for years that what we need is a virtual dungeon master. It's the coolest thing in games is when you screw over your dungeon master by doing something that he or she didn't expect, right? And until we have a virtual dungeon master, until we can actually dynamically change gameplay, not difficulty, difficulty, but until we can actively change gameplay, we're going to be somewhat less than tabletop role-playing games. So someone out there solve that problem, because I damn well don't know how. Okay, so the lessons we have to learn: dungeon master. Get away from character classes. Why do we need character classes in video games? It drives me crazy. Why do we have to roll? To hit armor class 0 has no place in video games. Anyway. Okay, I'm moving on. Okay, I know it's not a medium. I know it's not media, okay? But I'm the one up here on the stage, so I get to talk about it. There's a whole lot we can learn from Imagineers, okay? If you haven't read this book and you're a game developer, I will let you leave right now to go buy this. No, you just take out your phone and order it from Amazon. You can't leave. John Hench, Designing Disney. He talks about telling stories through the creation of explorable space. He talks about how to use perspective and color to communicate emotion and tell stories. He talks about keeping people moving so they can experience your world without being led around by the nose. It's incredible. All of that is relevant to everybody in this room. One of the most important things he talks about is the weenie. Anybody know what a weenie is? In Imagineering terms? Yeah, I know you do. I'm not calling on you today. One of my students is here. I'll call on you next week. Weenies are these eye-catching things that are visible throughout Disneyland or throughout a theme park. Stand at one end of Main Street and you will absolutely see the castle at the end of the street, okay? There's no way you cannot walk to that castle. When you get to the center square at the end of Main Street, you'll see the Matterhorn and Space Mountain God, I'm drawing a blank on the thing in Frontierland. Arg. What's that? No. Anyway, but there's one for every land. There's a weenie for every land. And you cannot not be attracted to them, okay? You're just going to go. So here's one of my rules of level design is show the goal. Show the goal. For me anyway, it isn't fun to figure out what to do. It's fun to figure out how to do it, okay? And what that means is show the goal, show a place that players want to go, but they don't know how to do it yet, or they don't know how to reach it yet. And using weenies, great, okay? Something that attracts players and makes them want to go someplace. Totally do that in a game. Lighting. Lighting can hide a lot of sins. And as great as our graphics are, I think we still have sins that deserve to be covered up. But just never ride a Disney ride with the lights on, okay? Because it's all duct tape and dust and black painted stuff and acoustic tiles. I mean, it's Small World looks just like this. It's really horrible. But anyway, they know how to use lighting to guide your eye in a medium where they can't predict where you're actually going to be looking. It's incredible. And we need to do that in games too. We do not know where players are going to look. And we can use lighting just the way the Imagineers do. Sound. We can learn a lot about audio. In games, we typically bring audio in at the very end. You know, we need to bring those folks in at the beginning because they are going to create our stories in a very real sense. And here's how the Imagineers do it. You know? That's setting a mood, you know? We can learn from the Imagineers. The other thing is this, the 12-minute rule. The next time you design a mission that takes 2 or 3 hours to play, I want you to think about this. Every ride at Disneyland runs less than 13 minutes. And that's because humans cannot concentrate for longer than that, okay? So if you insist on building 3-hour missions, which I think is a mistake, at least reward your player every 10 minutes or so to keep them moving, to keep them engaged, all right? So again, lessons we can learn. All right, now here's the one where you're not going to believe I'm actually going to talk about it. Okay, oral storytelling. It surprised me when I started thinking about sources of inspiration, and I realized, I mean, we should all be going to poetry slams, you know? It's incredible. It's really relevant. I believe actually that oral storytelling has something to tell all game developers. And I know you're thinking I'm kidding. I mean, what could the most ancient medium of storytelling have to tell the most modern? I haven't figured it all out yet. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, but there's something here, okay? And here's a good place to start. Jane Yolen's a novelist, and she actually said the story has 2 equal partners, the teller and the listener. Now, on one level, that's true of every medium. That's true of novels and movies and, you know, TV and everything. So where do we go from there? Here's where it gets interesting. We need to modify, storytellers modify their stories based on what the audience is telling them they need. There's an interaction there, okay? The audience response. I mean, like I see some of you falling asleep. I see some of you leaning back. I see a couple of you smiling. I'm going to change my tone of voice. I'm probably going to talk much more into the mic to wake you up because of how you're behaving. And storytellers do that all the time. No 2 tellings of a story are the same, all right? They do their part, the storytellers, they do their part by communicating the content of the story, just the way game developers do. You create the content, okay? They do it through intonation. You can do it through sound. They do it through motion, the way they're carrying themselves and what they're doing with their bodies. I don't have a direct correlation to games with that, but you figure one So the listeners respond. They lean forward, they lean back, their eyes go wide, they gasp, they laugh. And the storyteller responds directly to that, okay? And that changes the course of the story. So I love this quote. It's a two-way interaction, a two-way interaction. I've been saying for years, in fact, I said this at Georgia Tech the other day, that games are the only medium of expression, the only storytelling medium that's two-way, that is a dialogue between the creator and the player. And that is not true anymore. I realized that that is not true. Unlike any other medium, oral storytelling and games are the only media that can do this. Let's put it that way, okay? Games and oral storytelling are the only media where every experience is unique. If you make a game, I'm going to call you out right now, and I am going to generalize horribly, but if you make a game where every player has the same experience, where they describe the same series of actions and events, you really just need to go make a movie, okay? Listen to people talk about, a Tomb Raider game. Classic Tomb Raider, not so much anymore. But wasn't it cool when Lara Croft jumped across that chasm and almost didn't make it? And then I grabbed on, they even say, I grabbed onto the edge and I was starting to pull myself up and I wasn't sure I could make it. And then I looked up and there was Tyrannosaurus Rex. And everybody goes, yeah, that was cool when it happened to me too. What? When in an oral storytelling tradition and in video games, that doesn't have to be the case. We can create and work with players to create unique experiences. No two playthroughs the same. Okay, so I realize I'm repeating myself, but this is so weird to me, and it's probably so weird to you. I need to go over it over and over again. I mean, the story emerges from interaction, cooperation, and coordination, just like a game. It's the same thing. Poetry slam, I'm telling you. Okay, and a good storyteller responds to changing influences. So same thing. I'm going to zip through this. And this is my favorite. Neither author nor audience can claim sole authorship of the meaning, right? Just like games, just like games. You could substitute the word game for story in any of those descriptions, those quotes, and no one would blink an eye, all right? None of you should blink an eye, all right? So that's a look at a variety of media, very, very high level, obviously. All of which we do well to emulate in some ways and move away in others. But for me, the most important part is the move away. And here's where I'm going to get really judgmental, okay? The key to the future of gaming lies in moving away from the ways in which we are like other media and moving towards things that could never be achieved in any other medium, right? The things that make us unique are the things we need to be exploring and exploiting. All the games on this screen do that, by the way. So what makes us unique? For me, there are four things, right? I've got like a 2-hour lecture about this too, which I will not give you today. But the highest level is there are four things that we claim as our own. We can transport you. It's not LeBron James slam dunking the ball, and it's not Jeff Gordon driving that NASCAR car, and it's not name some Navy pilot. It's you. Maverick. There you go. It's not Maverick. It's not, oh my God. It's not Tom Cruise. It's you, right? It's always you. We can transport you and put you in the place of the person doing the action. We can immerse you. We can make you believe in the most outlandish worlds. We can make you believe in the things you're experiencing, okay? And when VR comes along, holy cow, is that going to get even more? No medium can do that other than us. We're the only medium in history that requires direct user participation to exist, If you don't do something in a game, either nothing happens or you die, okay? You have to participate. And without that, nothing happens, okay? No other medium in human history can make that claim. We are completely unique. And we're the first medium that responds. When we transport you, make you believe you're in a place, you do something, please turn off your cell phones. When we do all that, and when the player does his or her part, we can respond. we can change. And other than that oral storytelling stuff that I'm just starting to figure out, we're the only ones who can do it. I mean, think about that. There are 4 things that no other medium in the history of humankind has ever been able to do. Why would we not focus on exploiting those things? Why would we want to be more like other media? I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay. So it's important to me that we acknowledge this different, that consumers of other media, they observe and they interpret, and we are completely different. We engage and then players act. All right, so now it's time for my big finish. Well, almost. Why is this important? Why do I care so much about this unique stuff and being careful about what we borrow, learning what we should, not unlearning what we shouldn't? I care because opportunities to watch a new medium come into being and develop happen very rarely, once or twice a century, okay? And we are in that moment right now. The opportunity to be a part of that coming of age story as games come of age, you are living that moment. And whatever place you have in the game business, developer, publisher, player, it doesn't matter. You can participate in that, okay? That's what makes it special. You have a chance not just to witness it, but to be a part of it. So developers, if you're a developer, just honor what makes us unique. You don't have to agree with everything I've said about what makes us unique. Figure it out for yourself and then honor that. Don't just remake games of the past. Don't just imitate movies. As much as I genuinely do love Telltale games, by the way. But honor what makes us unique, okay? If you're a publisher, look, here's the deal. For all the testing and metrics gathering and all that stuff that publishers insist on and do so very well, 80% of games fail. Publishers, trust your creatives. If I fail 80% of the time, you are welcome to fire my ass, okay? We couldn't do worse. And gamers, just vote with your dollars, okay? If you want new kinds of experiences, support the games that give you new kinds of experiences, okay? The ones that couldn't be delivered in any other medium. If we do all that, if we find the right balance of borrowed and unique characteristics, we really do have the potential to be the medium of the 21st century, and Pixar can, eat our dust. If we don't, we'll inevitably become the bastard stepchild of Hollywood, and I, for one, don't want to see that. Okay, so that's basically what I have to say today, but I've got one more thing. We're going to take a commercial break. Andrew mentioned that I am now the director of the Denius-Sams Gaming Academy, and it's at the University of Texas. And I want to tell you a little bit about it, just a little tiny bit. It'll take me 2 minutes. So we're a 9-month post-baccalaureate program designed to train tomorrow's game development leaders. If you want to know more about this, one of them is right there in the 3rd row, and you can ask her about how the program is going, and she'll lie and tell you it's all great. So here's our mission, right? There are plenty of places in Georgia and elsewhere that teach people how to make games. That is not what we're about. We assume you already know how to make games. And what we want to do is teach you a few things: how to lead teams, how to lead them to greatness, and how to be a more effective team member yourself. If all you've done is work on a team of 4 people making the game of your dreams, you really don't have much of an idea of how the real world works on the indie side or on the professional side. No, sorry, on the mainstream side. That was out of line. But we can also give you a head start on networking, which might make your job easier. To get in, you need one of 3 things. You either need a game development degree or take a bunch of courses. You need some industry experience. 1 to 3 years is ideal. Or you need to be just that good, okay, that I have no choice but to let you in. We have one student in the class this year who's 19 years old, never went to college. We had no choice. I was not going to turn away the next Richard Garriott college dropout. It's not going to happen. The only key is that you've worked on a real game team of some kind, okay? So that's how you get in. And here's the best part. It's free. We pay you a $10,000 stipend to learn, okay? So you don't have to dig yourself a deeper hole of student debt, okay? So anyway, if that's interesting to you, go to our webpage for more information. I'll give you a card. We're opening applications for next year in January, and that is me. I'm really done now. Thanks. questions, I guess. I think there's time for questions.
Hey, so we've got a microphone and we're recording this, so please wait for a microphone. All right,
Oh,
I can't see
your
behind me.
grade just went down.
So, do you see over here? Sorry.
Okay.
Do you see VR as a new medium, or do you like it's emulating kind of like how games were emulating other mediums, or do you just see it as a tool used by mediums?
Well, I believe there's a VR panel I'll be on where I can tell you my views, which have been somewhat misinterpreted, but just somewhat. Just somewhat. I'll go out on a limb tomorrow. I think we have to look at it as a new medium. Whatever I think about its future and success likelihood and all of that, whatever I think, if you don't approach it as a new medium, I think you're missing a bet. It's not games. It's not movies. God, it's not movies.
And one more quick question: do you see alpha games as a way? You were talking about oral storytelling and getting people involved in the creation. Do you see that as a way of kind of doing that, or do you see it just as a quick way to make money and then back out on all your promises?
Wait, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Like games being released in alpha, people pay for them.
Oh, I think that's actively evil. Yeah, here, please test our game. Are you kidding me? No, I suppose you never want to say never, but I think minimum viable product is one of the most hideous expressions in the history of video gaming. I mean, I've gotten into a huge argument on. I'm in the middle of about 5 huge arguments online right now, because, as I said, I have no self-censoring mechanism. That's part of my charm, and I'll never work again. No, I wish we could think about maximum possible game. I mean, if you need an acronym, why does it have to be MVP? Why can't it be MPG? I'm not saying we necessarily have to ship a finished product, though that would be my preference. But why can't we look at giving players as much as humanly possible at the highest level of quality, instead of giving them the least we can possibly give them without them giving us a hard time?
Hey, sorry if I botched the way I asked this, but earlier you were talking about changing the way the game play experience goes based on, like in the same way the oral tradition goes, like changing the way the game is played or something along those lines based on how the character acts. Were you talking about different like game mechanics or changing? Because I know people already do that with difficulty and like showing tutorials, like letting you go, like those miniature things, that's still in line with whatever mechanics are there. But were you talking about expanding mechanics or?
Not so much expanding mechanics. When I talk about the virtual dungeon master, what I'm talking about is we're actually doing a little bit of what I'm about to say. I mean, we started doing that in games like Deus Ex and Thief and System Shock and Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect. I mean, there are a bunch of games that are doing some of this, but it's about the game observing what the player is doing. We're already gathering all this metrics, all this data. We know every step players take. We know every shot they fire if it's a game where you can shoot. We know every place they go and every place they don't. We know every alarm they trip. We know everything about every player's experience. And yet, we're so enamored of our own creativity that we don't try to give the player more of what they're telling us they like. So I'm going to give you a terrible example, and then I'm going to contradict myself, right? You're going through a first-person shooter, or a game like Deus Ex. Let's do that one, where you can fight or sneak, right? And you're going through and shooting a bunch of stuff. The game shouldn't say, hey, he's shooting a bunch of stuff. Let's give him more stuff to shoot at, because I bet he'll find that fun. Or, she's going through and no one's ever seeing her. None of the NPCs have seen her. I bet she likes sneaking. Let's give her more opportunities to sneak. Man, that person is picking every lock they see and hacking every computer. Let's lock some more doors and make some and lock some more computers so they get to do more of what they like doing. So it's about watching what the players are doing, and not just so we can get them to spend more money, but so we can actually tune the gameplay to what they want to do. Now, here's the problem. I'm not done yet. Oh, no, I'm a wordy bastard. I'm not done yet. The problem is, how do we know we're asking the right question, right? This person, like, if the first person I talked about is fighting a bunch of stuff and like always has one bullet in their gun, or their gun is always empty, does that mean they like fighting, or does that mean they suck at shooting? You know, you have to know which question to ask before you can adjust based on the answer. So it's a tough problem. Dynamic gameplay adjustment is a tough problem, and we're making little baby steps, but we're not there yet.
But on that note, just because you mentioned Thief and games like that, I've heard a lot of complaints from people about games like that being too open with like what you're able to do, and not focusing on, say, stealth, but like giving
Thief is
you
entirely a stealth game. Thief is I was going to brag. Thief is a total stealth game. I mean, frankly, I made Deus Ex specifically because the Thief team wouldn't allow me to fight in that game. When I was testing that game, there was a point where I was not good enough at sneaking. I couldn't. And I said, let me kill that guard. And they said, no. And so I said, if we let you kill, no one will ever sneak. And I just said, I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to make a game where you can fight or sneak, and it's going to work.
Are we talking about the old Thief or the new one that has the same bloody name?
No one should ever talk about the new Thief.
All right, yeah, that was the one I was talking about. Yeah, that was the reason I was
Now,
talking about.
having said that, hold on. Let me back up.
Right.
Let me just say, I am not just saying this because I want to pull my fat out of the fire. I really like and respect the guys at IDOS Montreal, and they totally get Deus Ex. They made 3 or 4 little mistakes on the design side, but they really get the Deus Ex experience. They just never quite grokked Thief, because Thief is a very, very subtle and very hard thing to understand.
Thank you for Deus Ex, by the way.
You're very welcome.
I heard you mention weenies, and the first thing that came to mind was the Dark
Don't
Souls.
say what the first thing that came to mind is.
Well, the first thing that came to mind was the Dark Souls series. What are your thoughts on the series itself? Are you
On
familiar?
the Dark Souls series, it's too hard. No, I think they're doing some interesting. I'm a weenie. No, I think they're doing a very good job of directing players. I think they're doing really interesting stuff on the pseudo multiplayer front. I think they're doing some interesting narrative stuff. I mean, if I were a better gamer, or I were 12 and had the Twitch skills necessary, I would absolutely play them. I can't get through them.
Hey, so in the future, do you see games getting, like, do you see the AAA games still going to be most of the market, or do you see more nuanced kind of niche narrative experiences that particular users will like? Or do you see that those have a lot more potential?
Well, it's important to remember that AAA console games are still about half the market. You know, and that may not be the total dominance they used to have, but they're still a big part of what we do, and they're still making a lot of money. But the problem is, there are like 5 games that make all that money. And there are 2,500 games every year at E3, so that means that, you know, 2,495 of them are in a world of trouble. But I don't see consoles going away. I mean, not anytime soon. Who knows? You know, prediction is a fool's game, and I'm this much of a fool, but not this much, right? I could see them going away at some point, but not anytime soon. I just think the fact is, we are in, I said this earlier, I mean, we're kind of in a golden age, right? I mean, there are desperate problems in that every business model imaginable is being tried, and they're all failing. I mean, no business model is working right now, not free to play, not, you know, pay once, play forever, not subscription, not any, I mean, nothing's working, at least reliably and predictably. But other than that, the fact that no one knows how to make money, it really is kind of a golden age. I mean, if you have an idea, creatively, it really is. I mean, look, if you have an idea, think about how magical this is. You have an idea. You can go into your basement alone and 6 months later change the world. I mean, the tools are there. The creativity is in this room. You know, there are a dozen ways to reach an audience. So, I mean, have you ever heard of a game called Minecraft? It's one guy. And he changed the world. That's the world we live in now. When I started, if you weren't working for a traditional, development studio who was working for a traditional publisher, well, that was it. You weren't making games. And now that's not true. I mean, it's the coolest thing about games right now is that everything is happening in games right now. So I don't see there being a future. I see there being many, many futures, and I find that really encouraging.
I was just sort of wondering, kind of considering your opinions on cutscenes and the characterization of in video games. How do you feel about, like, if you have any criticisms of the way Hideo Kojima does make his games and his methods?
Okay. Yes, okay. I think cutscenes are a crutch. I think we need to find better ways to tell stories with players. Cutscenes means we're telling a story to a player. And if we overdo that, I'm back to my standard line, you might as well go make a movie, right? So I think cutscenes are useful in some circumstances, not in others. I would love never to have to use a cutscene in a game again, ever, as long as I live. That would be my preference. Now, in Disney Epic Mickey and Epic Mickey The Power 2, we used cutscenes all over the place. And that was because in order to communicate that story to a more casual audience, which we were trying to reach, we had to give them stuff they were familiar with. We couldn't count on them to understand the unique ways that games tell stories. So we used cutscenes. So in some circumstances, I would absolutely use them. In other ways, I wish we could just leave them behind and never think about them again. Kojima, he's miraculous. I mean, how do you make an hour-long intro movie that makes no sense and have people love you for it? I just don't get it.
And one quick other one. I guess if there was one thing that you could change about Deus Ex Human Revolution, what would it be?
I'll pick, like I said, there are 3 or 4, which I'd rather not say while I'm being recorded. But the boss battles, I mean, obviously, right? You spend an entire game training players that they have multiple ways to solve problems, and then you confront them with bosses that you must kill. That's the first thing I would change. And I think they figured that out. They know it.
I'm sorry, I have a question that came to mind when you were talking about cutscenes. I remember a game that was on the PlayStation 3, I believe it was called Rain or something like that.
Heavy Rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that game was more interactive, like even things that were more like cutscenes you actually interacted with. Is that more the kind of storytelling you would probably think would benefit games more?
Everybody in this room wants me to get in trouble. It's unbelievable.
Well, I was just trying to say that you said games should be more about the player telling their own story. What I mean is, like, depending on how the cutscene goes, it actually decides the path of the story.
Okay.
Like, there's no.
Here is my test of a genuine game narrative. Here's my test. Are you really telling a story with players in the way that only games can do? This is my test. Can the player do something that surprises him or herself? And can the player do anything that surprises the people who made the game? Okay? And in all the games I've worked on, players are constantly surprising themselves, okay? Doing things that they weren't sure were going to work. But that's a lot of games do that. I mean, Heavy Rain and The Walking Dead and all the interactive movies, they will surprise players because they don't know all of the stuff going on behind the scenes. But the other part of that, players surprising the developers, that's special. That's where games become art for me. And I've talked to, I haven't talked to David Cage. I've listened to him describe how he works. And I've talked to the guys at Telltale, and they're friends of mine, and I genuinely love what they do. But fundamentally, if I can reduce those games down to their essence, and I mean, there's no judgment in what I'm about to say, but what they are is 5 movie scripts jammed together, okay? And when you make a choice, you're just deciding, I want to play this script now. Oh, no, now I want to play this script. No, I want to play this script. And so players will be surprised, like I said, because they don't see all the scripts. But no one at Telltale has ever been or will ever be surprised by something a player does. And David Cage will never be surprised by anything any of his players do. And the fact is, going all the way back to Ultima 6, I'll tell you the Ultima 6 story. You built a party. You were the avatar and you had a party of other adventurers with you. One of the people in your party could be a character named Sherry the Mouse, okay, who was, in fact, a mouse, right? And there was a puzzle in the game. Richard Garrett and I worked on the design of that, and we had a rule that said every puzzle will be solvable in at least 2 ways, okay? And there was one where we couldn't think of a second way. You were on one side of a portcullis, and there was a lever on the other side, and you had to flip that lever, okay? And the portcullis was modeled a portcullis has like spikes, and the spikes go into the ground, and it's got bars across it. And I was watching a QA guy playing the game, and he was at that spot, and you needed the telekinesis spell to flip the lever. That was the only solution we could come up with. And he stood on the other side of the portcullis, and I looked at him, and I was thinking, he doesn't have the levitation spell. The telekinesis spell. And he's screwed. But what he did was he had Sherry the Mouse in his party, had her go under the portcullis and flip the lever and solve the puzzle in a way that the designers of the game hadn't planned. And when I pulled myself up off the floor, I said, I am doing that for the rest of my life, okay? And in Deus Ex, there are some classic examples. We had a thing called the light attack munition that it was an explosive. You could put it on a wall, and when a bad guy came near it, it would blow up. But if you went near it, it wouldn't blow up. And so what players figured out, they started creating what we called lamb ladders. And they would put one on a wall and jump up on it, and then put another one up on a wall and jump up on it, and put another one up on a wall and jump up on it. And they were getting all sorts of places that we hadn't expected them to get. That was not planned. Players figured that out themselves. They surprised me, okay? There was another time, again in Deus Ex, where it was a year after we shipped, and the lead tester was demonstrating the game for some IDOS executives. And let's not even think about why IDOS executives needed to see a demo of a game they had shipped a year earlier that had won like a bunch of Game of the Year awards, but that's another story. So he was this tester was in a place I had been 100 times myself, that I'd seen 1,000 people play. And I saw him, I knew what problem he was trying to solve. There were 3 guards and an alarm thing, and anyway, I knew what problem he was trying to solve, and he started sneaking around and moving explosive barrels here and moving a gas barrel over there, and then he got back, pulled out his pistol, which is the weakest weapon in the game, and I was looking at him and saying, I think I know what he's trying to do. Is that going to work? Is that going to solve this problem? And he took one shot with the weakest weapon in the game, took out 3 guards, destroyed an alarm system, and solved 3 problems with one shot of the weakest weapon in the game. A year after we shipped, a place I had watched people play 1,000 times, and I didn't know if that was going to work. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about jamming five scripts together. I'm talking about creating a simulation and giving players tools to interact with that simulation in ways that we don't even understand. Okay, just look up emergent gameplay. That's what we're looking for. Okay, just look it up.
One final question.
Oh man, I'm sorry I talked so long.
You've talked a lot about contrasting different mediums and how they relate to games and so forth. What are your thoughts about converging mediums? For example, like you have franchises like The Walking Dead or Star Wars where they exist on multiple platforms. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hate the word transmedia, but it's a useful word, right? And I can't say I hate it, because in 2004 when I started Junction Point, it's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted comic books and novels and movies and TV shows and games, and work with the people who create the works in those other media. And so I think it's phenomenal. I think the critical thing is that we get out of this licensing mindset and think about creating things that will work in all those media naturally. as opposed to trying to jam, square pegs into round holes, which is kind of what we do now. I guess that's it. Thanks.